Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. This is the next next installment here, where I'm covering all of the films of my favorite director of all time, and that is the one and only Stanley Kubrick. So this has been a lot of fun. I have been going through the movies that I own of his. I have some DVD copies of his movies, and then also quite a few DVD copies. I don't have a lot of his movies, unfortunately, on Blu-ray yet. I do have a handful. I have 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I did a show on. I did a show on, of course, pretty much my favorite horror film of all time, and pretty much, well, definitely my favorite Kubrick film of all time, and that is The Shining. I have that. I have multiple copies of that on DVD and actually Blu-ray, and I have a collector's edition of that. I also have Spartacus. I did a show on Spartacus recently. I have that on Blu-ray. I have Full Metal Jacket on Blu-ray. I also have today's topic, which is going to be on probably his most controversial film, and I think easily one of his best movies, and that is Clockwork Orange. Clockwork Orange, I have a really interesting and kind of weird story to how I discovered this movie and how the first time I saw it, my reaction to it, and also my um, relationship to the book Clockwork Orange, which the movie is based on. Kubrick has done quite a few adaptations. I mean, The Shining probably being the most popular one, of course, from the Stephen King book, and so, and of course, Lolita, which is one of my favorite films of his, if not a really close second to The Shining. I love that movie. That's also based on one of my favorite books of all time. So it was really interesting, and of course, I have Clockwork Orange. I have that on Blu-ray, and it's pretty amazing, pretty fabulous. Again, it's one of those things I'm always surprised and blown away by when I realize when some of the year or years when a lot of his films came out. And this is probably one of the biggest surprises for me. Every time I watch this movie, or I come across, just when I realize when this film came out, just how so incredibly timeless the story is, so ahead of its time. But then to think of the decade when this film came out, and also when the story came out of the book, but how it just pushed the boundaries of so many taboos, and just how controversial it was at the time, and to a degree how it still remains a really controversial film. And again, it's all testimony to the genius of Kubrick. And Clockwork Orange came out in 1971. You know, and I'm going to get into all of the controversy that happened around the film, and all of the I don't know, the protests, the upheaval that this film caused and created. And of course, the cast, the iconic Malcolm McDowell plays Alex. Adrian Adrian Corey plays Miss Alexander. Patrick McGee plays Mr. Alexander. Warren Clark, John John Clive, Michael Bates, Miriam Carlin. And again, this film was, well, I definitely think across the board out of all of the films, I think I would say Kubrick's films that I'd say are the most controversial films. And I to a degree I don't I think of his two most controversial films, I would say first and foremost would be Clockwork Orange and Lolita. And in my honest opinion, I don't think these films could come out in today's climate. I don't think it could happen. I don't think it could get financed by any. I definitely think, without a doubt, in today's climate of where we are now as a society, I don't think that any major studio would get behind this in any way. They would just stay away from the topics that both of these films discuss and talk or the taboos that both of these films explore, and the social questions a lot of these films that both of these films explore. I feel like no major studio would back a film like this. They wouldn't finance it. They would not distribute it. And if for some crazy reason, say these films were made now and Kubrick was, you know, a modern director, from in this decade, I think there would be so much interference with the studio where the film would be completely chopped in half. There would be so many compromises, and I think in that regard, because of how Kubrick's character was as a director, the films just probably wouldn't get made, or he would have to figure out some other way to finance them. It's a wild time. I mean, when you have somebody like, another iconic director, one of my favorite directors, Martin Scorsese, who has been around for decades and has also, I talk a lot about Scorsese being one of those directors where, when you look at his collection of films that he's done through all the decades from 70s, 80s, 90s to now, it's, the consistency of his work is just incredible, and he's just such a powerful voice. But one of his last films, and I believe, yeah, it was his last film, The Irishman, which I think is such an incredible movie. I've only seen it once, and I was just blown away by that film. I think it's one of his best movies, and it came out about 2 years ago. And again, he's one of the most established names in Hollywood. He's one of the most well respected directors in Hollywood, and he's been around for so long. And for my money, he's like one of the most consistent directors. He still has, when you see his films, you still see the passion that he brings to the screen as a filmmaker. And he did The Irishman, but he could not get that film financed by any major studio, which is just crazy. And I think from what I've read about and from what I gather around that whole process and time period, and The Irishman came out about 2 years ago or so. The I think one of the big factors that kept studios away from it, or why they didn't want to get involved with it, major studios, was because of how ambitious The Irishman is, and it's the budget that it required, and the length of the film. The film is probably his longest film ever. And some of his films, Scorsese, that he tells these like epic crime stories. Like movies like Goodfellas, amazing, Casino, another, just incredible movies. But they're really ambitious. They follow characters over huge amounts of time, and The Irishman is right, kind of in that vicinity of the scope of that kind of a scope. But I think in some ways The Irishman is even a little bit more kind of grandiose. It really, because it spans so much time, the length, the sheer length of it, it's probably his longest film. And to see that a name like Martin Scorsese could not get financed, and he eventually got backing, and it became a Netflix production. Netflix fully financed it. It wasn't. It was released in theaters, but very at a very small percentage of distribution. Again, which is just mind-boggling. And it just had. I think it only was in the theaters for like maybe a month or two, and it was available streaming. And then I had to wait because I don't do any streaming, so I had to wait over a year to see it on DVD. And it was like over a year's time until it was released to where you could rent it and rent it in physical form. So just that's the sign of the times. And I feel like, well, with Kubrick, who, and especially where I'm talking about these two films, Lolita and especially Clockwork Orange, the subject matter, it's even more of a taboo. And I mean, no way in hell would a major studio, touch these films. So it's a strange conundrum that we're in, and especially now with the strikes that are happening in Hollywood. So essentially, no movies are getting made right now, and films are getting pushed up and really delayed. And it's crazy. It's a crazy time. It's a crazy time. I have very, not to get off on a tangent, but it's all related. But I kind of have like, and again, I'm not fully educated or fully informed as to why the strikes are happening, but I have been reading about it and I have been following it. And from what I gather, it's mainly due to relatively reasonable and very fair uh, payments that the unions, the artist unions, the actors unions are asking these studios. They're asking to essentially get paid for what they do and to get a percentage off of these streaming, percentages. And now most of the work seems to be happening through all of these companies, Hulu and Netflix and whatnot. All of these companies are, that seems to be where all the work is. And so apparently with all of these streaming platforms and whatnot, a lot of these actors are not getting paid their fair due. And so that's what more or less what these strikes are about. And at the same time, a lot of these companies are not doing very well. So it's very complicated. But this is essentially a union agenda, or it's the voice is the main voice. All of these actors and people involved in the industry on a lot of these productions all are part of these, these various unions. So they're making these demands, and if you look at their claims, they're actually really fair and pretty sound. But it's an interesting thing. I kind of feel like there's a strange thing with unions to a degree, because for instance, one of my favorite musicians and artists of all time, Frank Zappa, he had a notorious and really cantankerous relationship with unions. And he was in all kinds of controversy for a long time because when he would go on tour, and especially when he would play in New York, he would basically hire his own crew and pay those folks involved with his shows and his production. He would basically pay them out of pocket, and they would be hired by him. They weren't necessarily part of any unions. And when he was performing in New York for a while, the unions were not having that because they, under contractual obligations, when he would come to town, he was basically put under this pressure that, well, to hire these people to work on your show and your production and the sound, you needed to work with the unions and hire these folks. You have to work with them. And he was insistent on, well, no, I'm the artist. I want to hire with who I want to have my own crew. I have the people that I trust and that I know and that I work with, so I need to work with these people. So he was at war with the unions for a very long time, and especially from what I gather when he went to New York and would play in New York. And I even think at one point he stopped playing in New York because of the controversy around it. So very interesting. And then the other stories I remember hearing was, you have two iconic directors, Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino. They did a really amazing, one of the best, I think, vampire movies ever made, and that is From Dusk Till Dawn, which is a movie I will eventually review. And amazing movie, but I have that on DVD, and there's an amazing documentary about the making of that movie. And Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino both created that movie. Tarantino wrote the screenplay, and Robert Rodriguez directed it, and they worked on every aspect of the film together. And it was shot in California, but the documentary itself goes way into the relationship between what they were doing, what they were trying to do, and their relationship to the unions that were happening, that were trying to basically do the same thing of where, well, you're in our town, you're in our state, you're in our cities, you're working on these films. So in order to have these productions, you have to work with the unions, and you have to, pay a fee, and it has to be all legitimately done for the unions. And they took kind of the same stance that Zappa did during the 70s and even the 80s, but mostly in the 70s, where they were insistent on hiring who they wanted to hire. People that they knew personally, people that they trusted, people who had worked on previous productions, and that they were not. And there was a sense of loyalty, but they were not a part of, like, say, the system of the unions. And in this documentary, you see all of the pressure that they were under with the making of these films, and how the unions tried to sabotage more or less what was going on. And it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing. I think it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more black and white. And we're seeing that now, and not that I'm against unions, because I'm not, but we're seeing that now with one of the biggest announcements in Hollywood was Dune, Denis Villeneuve's sequel to the Dune remake that he did a couple of years ago, which is a masterpiece. The second chapter in Dune was supposed to be coming out this year, and now it's been delayed, and it's got moved to next year already. So, and that's all due to these strikes. So it's crazy. So there's no movies getting made really right now, and the movies that are made or that are kind of done are being shelved and pushed to later dates. So things are fucked up when it comes to that. So, but that's probably something worth talking about more in a specialty show. Again, I am not a specialist in understanding these complex things, but the general consensus is from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing. The other thing that was one other thing related to this was I've actually had personal experiences also with unions. And that being said, I think unions are very, very healthy. I think they act as protective agencies for people being compensated for their hard work, and in a lot of ways, they're essential. And all of their reasons and their demands and things that they ask, when you look at them, they're pretty sound and they're very fair, I think, for the most part. But I think it's also, very complex. Like these two examples that I just talked about. But again, talking about I've had two experiences around unions where I have dealt with unions myself, and they, to be honest, I kind of felt like they left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. So, quite a few years ago, I was I was working a little bit on independent films. I had some experience making videos for a band that I was in, and I did that for a little while, and then eventually I got into I had this feeling to, you know, to become a director, and I directed this short little film, this vampire movie called Rapture, and I did this quite a few years ago, and for a while I had aspirations to kind of get into filmmaking, and I kind of lost enthusiasm, and I just kind of lost interest in doing it. But again, my passion for film is higher and bigger than ever. But there was a period I had done this little film which was a piece of shit, and and it was a fun learning experience, and it was really hard, and it gave me a whole new respect for filmmaking and filmmakers and just all around. But I was in that zone for a long time, and I was working on, after I had done that film, I was working for a few years. I was working on a couple other projects. I had like worked on writing a few different scripts for a project that I was working on. I had actually collaborated with a couple of people, and one project was kind of, I had two projects kind of going on at the same time. One project got to the point of where we were actually shooting, and we shot a bunch of footage, and but then it kind of fell apart, and at the end of the day I wasn't really happy with it, so it all kind of got canned. But at one point, a girl I was dating. She worked at this college, and this college is, I'm not going to name names, but this college is located in Maine, and it's, I didn't know much about it, but it's really one of the most well respected and kind of a world renowned school for filmmaking. And she worked there. She was the chef at this college. So over a period of time, I had played some gigs there, and I had I was getting to know a lot of the people that were teaching there, and and I met some people there that were really steeped in the industry. I had met some people that had worked with Steven Spielberg. I met a couple of people that actually worked with Quentin Tarantino, and they worked on a bunch of these big films and big productions. They had worked on one of the guys, two guys I remember meeting had worked with Steven Spielberg on the one of the Indiana Jones films, and another guy I had met had just worked with Quentin Tarantino on Inglorious Bastards. And I met a slew of other people, and I was kind of blown away that this little school had all of this like kind of power, and that they were, really serious people, and I had no idea. And I was working on this project for a while. I was writing it, and I was working on this movie that was going to be kind of like a crime drama kind of film. And I was like going back and forth all these different drafts, and then I had a story, and I was collaborating with a couple of people, and and all these things. And then my girlfriend at the time, she said, "Well, what you should do is like talk to some of these people here at the school, and they can like help you out. Maybe you can like get the ball rolling and actually get a project going, because they would shoot, because a lot of the students that go there, they would shoot films and shoot videos all the time, and they're incredibly active." So I remember approaching a couple. It came up in conversation after I kind of got to know a few people there, and I had said, well, more or less, like, I'm not anybody in particular special. I'm really interested in independent filmmaking, and I talked to this one guy about my story, the idea that I had, the little bit of experience that I had, and what I was kind of thinking of trying to do in the future. And he kind of, this one guy in particular was a director, and he was a student there, and he was like graduating. He had been there for a couple of years, and we kept talking, and we actually exchanged emails, and we were like continuing to talk about maybe working together, you know, in some capacity, like screenplay writing, or maybe even him possibly directing. And you know, so it was kind of exciting. And then, you know, I told him about how I had done the other projects, and I had like hired, you know, friends that I knew to kind of be involved. And then I also worked with just some people who I knew who were models, you know, here in Maine. And I remember like we got to a point where we were talking, and he's like, "Well, we can't do anything, and we won't do anything unless you know, basically agree to work with the unions, and you have to. It all has to be unionized and legit and on the table. That if you want to work with any actors whatsoever, you have to go through those channels and work with the unions." And it was kind of like I understood it on one hand, but then I was like thrown off by it, because suddenly what I was doing, and again, I don't consider myself a real filmmaker, but what I was doing, and then people that I looked up to in the filmmaking industry that I felt were good, were inspirations. They were essentially just hiring people that they wanted to hire. They were just not, they weren't dealing with unions. And suddenly I was kind of being told that, well, that's not a legitimate way. You can't, a director can't just show up without permits or whatnot and just hire his friends and just hire random people. I was told that that's like just flat out wrong. Like you can't do that as a filmmaker. And you have to go through the channels of where if you're gonna like legitimately make a movie or some have legitimate production, you need to go through those channels and hire and work with the unions. And suddenly I was like, I had this really strange feeling, and I felt like this guy was putting pressure on me that I needed to work with the unions, and I couldn't hire people that I knew. I couldn't hire people, random people. Case in point, one of my favorite directors, Herschel Gordon Lewis, I don't think ever worked with unions ever in his entire life. So, and you know, he was a crazy man, and he would literally hire people off the street. And so I suddenly was at odds with that. And I felt because this guy was putting pressure on me that I needed to. I can understand in the legitimacy of that, but it was really kind of a weird thing, kind of a strange, eye-opening experience. And then one time I was playing a long time ago. I was playing these gigs with the saxophone player who was a really great player, and he was living in Europe at the time. He was living in Denmark, and he had family and family ties here in Maine, so he was here in Maine on breaks, and he was going to school in Denmark, and he was a regular gigging musician, but he was a part of the unions in Europe, the musicians union, and he was saying how he felt it was really great where he was at, because he was, whatever gig he was doing, whatever show he was involved in, he was getting paid a set fee, and he knew even if things would get canceled, he would still get paid because it was done through this union. It was an agency, and he basically would show up to the gigs after they were confirmed, and the agency would take care of everything else. But he said he felt that there was like overall just good job security, and that things were guaranteed, even if it was like last minute cancellations. Where he felt like, well, with working without a union, it's a rat race. Things could get canceled last minute, blah blah blah. But the only way he could play gigs was through the unions. He couldn't get a call from a friend, or get a call from like a random person saying, "Hey, can you play this party, or can you play this gig?" And then you agree on the fee, and then you just talk to your friends or talk to your band, and then just show up. He couldn't do that. It had to be done through the union. And I remember talking to other friends about that, like that is interesting. Like on one hand, he's very well taken care of. He's got a set fee, and he gets paid regardless of for his job, for his work, even if things get canceled, and he's guaranteed a set fee. But then I remember talking to some friends about that, and they're like, "Well, that's the dilemma. Is like, of course he's got that security, but if you got a call to play a wedding or to play a special party or some last minute concert, and that gig was, say, a very well paying gig, you and you could get your band or your friends to play at that gig. Under that In that situation, he couldn't do that. He couldn't do that at all, and he would have to go through those channels. So it's interesting. It was very interesting, and it was a kind of a weird dilemma around that. So I had kind of mixed feelings about it. Mixed things about it. So I don't know. It's I think it's more complicated than it is. Um, than at least how it's portrayed. And it's not that I'm anti-union at all, but it's I don't know. It's interesting. So getting back to the main topic of today's show, Clockwork Orange, which came out in 1971. I first saw this movie for the first time, and the first time I read the book was when I was in college. I had a roommate when I was a freshman uh, at school where uh, he had he had the book. He had the original uh, book that was written by Anthony Burgess, and the novel Clockwork Orange came out in 1962. And I had never read the book. I had never seen the movie. I, of course, was very aware of it. I knew a lot about it, and I remember. I remember reading. He let me borrow the book, and I read the book, and it was really just so intense, and it just kind of warped my brain. And I was just like blown away by it. And I remember after I read the book, I saw that he had the DVD. He had it on. He had um, Clockwork Orange on DVD, and I had never seen it before. And it was really funny because when I was at college, I was a major party person for a while, and I had some friends that were all like, we were all smoking pot and drinking and just, like kind of typical college kids. And we used to party a lot and get really high, and like it was during the time when Blockbuster Video was around. We'd go out and rent movies, or go to Tower Records, or listen to music and just get totally fucked up, and we'd have a good time. And I remember on a Friday night, it was a Friday night, and I was like, "Hey, I think what I'll do is I'll borrow my my roommate's DVD copy of Clockwork Orange, and I'll bring it over to my friend's dorm, and we can watch it." And so I told those guys about it, and they're like, "Yeah, let's do that." And we went over. I grabbed the DVD copy. I'd never seen it before. Went over to my friend's dorm, and there was probably like 8 to 10 of us all hanging out. And my roommate's dorm, they had a pretty nice uh, dorm, and it was pretty big. But he had this pretty nice sound system. He had a full PA inside his room, and he had this big, pretty giant TV set up. He had a DVD player, and he had a subwoofer, and then he had um, a full PA system, and he had two speakers set up on either side of the room. So that was like our hangout pad. We would always hang out there and listen to music, or get super high and just talk to the wee hours of the night and just drink and all this stuff. And then one of our good friends at the time, who he was from Korea, and he could only speak. None of us could speak Korean, but he could speak English, and it was like broken English. So it was always hard, kind of, for us to communicate, but we managed. But the funny thing was he was a drug dealer at school, and he was the biggest weed dealer. So he would come over and hang out with us and give us all of this free pot all the time. And so we would get high all the time. And I remember bringing Clockwork Orange over to the place, and we got super baked before. before we decided to watch it, and then we watched it, and everybody was, by the end of the movie, everybody, including myself, because of the state of mind we were in, we were just completely blown away by it and just like totally fucked up and totally disturbed by what we just watched. And everybody was just like, they were shocked. They were shocked by, by what we had just seen. And we talked about it for weeks and weeks. And that was my introduction to watching Clockwork Orange. Um, and it was just, mind melting. It was a mind melting experience. And it's a futurist sci-fi tale. I feel Clockwork Orange, and it's basically set in the future of England. Alex, played by Malcolm McDowell, and his droogs, his gang, spend their nights getting high on the Karoka milk bar before I'm embarking on what is termed the ultraviolence, where they basically, this gang of thugs, go out on the countryside and just rape and kill and cause chaos. And then the story is mainly centered on Alex being kind of captured by the state and by the police and being put into this intense therapy where they're basically trying to change him from top to bottom into what they deem to be like a productive citizen. And this film gets into so many things as far as your ideas around sexuality, uh, even thought control, um, fascism to a degree. I mean, it raises so many questions, and it's just such a an intense experience. It was the first time I had ever seen a film that where there were rape scenes. And this film was so controversial when it came out. It was banned in multiple countries upon its release. It was protested and picketed. It was basically powers that be tried their damnedest to basically ban this movie into existence. Which again, in the end, just increased uh, the public's curiosity about the film. And I had never seen a film like that before, and that it just socially raised so many questions, about authority and uh, the idea of like the thought police and how governments and institutions can, or how they will try to manipulate people into assimilating, and where you start questioning in a free society what is an individual, and the extents that will be taken to conform people and to create people in what society believes is a productive citizen. Um, so many questions. And when I said in the top of the show, I don't think, because of the subject matter and the graphic nature of this film, especially around the graphic nature of Clockwork Orange, I don't think this story could really be made today. I don't think it would get financed. I don't think it would be made. Just amazing. And of course, the film score, amazing work by Wendy Carlos. Wendy Carlos, I need to do a show on just her work, but one of the most innovative, one of the most iconic electronic music artists really out there. She's worked with Kubrick. She had worked with Kubrick before on The Shining, just incredible, and also Clockwork Orange. One of the most iconic movies ever, and timeless, timeless. In this movie, I feel like out of all of Kubrick's work, this was probably the most um, taboo tackling story. I mean, you talk about pushing boundaries, and let alone when you think of the decade and the time when this film came out, 1971, it's staggering. And if you watch this film now, it's still, um, it's so timeless, like all of his work. I also feel like this is also an exception to where I feel as great as the novel is, I feel that the movie is superior to the book. Just an incredible experience. I think it's worth reading and it's worth checking out. I remember when I was in college, I had read the book, and then I think a day or two after was when I watched the movie for the first time. But I definitely feel the movie is one of those exceptions where the movie is much better than the book. And I think, Kubrick did that with The Shining. And I think overall, even though the book is still a masterpiece, I think what he did with Lolita, I think overall the story, his adaptation, Nabokov, who wrote Lolita, also wrote the screenplay for the theatrical version of Lolita. But I think that the film version is actually better than the book too. But can't say enough good things. Clockwork Orange, Malcolm McDowell's greatest role, just an impeccable classic. I haven't seen it in quite a few years. I need to watch it again, but just amazing. So thanks again for people, the new folks that have been joining up here on Film Fanatic and subscribing, and it's been a lot of fun. So stay tuned for still got a few more movies to go around Kubrick. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.